We're told that kindness is a virtue, right? That that being nice and accommodating and pleasant and agreeable and even helpful will make us better people and more lovable as well. But what no one really tells you is that when kindness becomes your only currency, it starts to bankrupt you eventually. See, there's a moment many of us have faced, though we might not have had the language for this, but it's the moment where we realize that we're being praised more for how well we erase ourselves, for how smoothly we fold into other people's expectations, for how readily we silence our discomfort and dismiss our needs and carry other people's emotions like it's our job. Wow, you're such a nice person, they would say, right? But inside, something feels off. Because what they're calling kindness doesn't really feel like kindness at all. It feels more like suffocation. It feels like being congratulated for bleeding quietly. And this didn't start yesterday. See, for many of us, this pattern began in our childhood. Maybe we grew up in a home where emotions were unpredictable and where approval had to be earned, or where love felt really conditional on our behavior. So we learned early on that to survive, we had to be good. We had to be nice. We had to be easy to be around. We had to soothe and absorb and comply. And over time, we confused kindness with safety. We believed that being liked would protect us and that pleasing others would ensure that we wouldn't ever be rejected. And that being agreeable meant we'd finally be accepted and maybe even loved. But now we're adults, and the cost is becoming quite clear. Because when we've built our identity around being the nice one, we begin to disappear in pieces. We stop telling the truth, not just to others, but more so to ourselves, right? And we stay silent in conversations where we really ought to be speaking up. We offer help when we don't really have the capacity to give it. We smile through discomfort. We overextend ourselves. We make ourselves small. And then we wonder why connection feels so hollow. Why our relationships feel very one-sided. Why we feel invisible in these rooms that are full of people. And the truth is, chronic niceness is not the same as compassion. It's often a trauma response, a protective shield, a way of managing threats by staying likable. It's fawning, one of those lesser-known trauma responses alongside fight and flight and freeze. Fawning is when we appease to survive, when we scan the room for who needs care, and then we offer it preemptively so that we don't have to abandon ourselves or feel abandoned in the process. It looks like generosity, but it's really rooted in fear. And here's the heartbreaking part. The world will reward us for this. Jobs, friendships, family dynamics, they all reinforce the idea that being easy to deal with is the same as being good. And slowly we begin to believe this as well, that we're only worthy when we are agreeable, and that our presence must always come with this kind of disclaimer that says, don't worry, I'm not going to be a burden. That our value is in how little we inconvenience others. And you see, the longer we live in this pattern, the harder it becomes for us to tell where ourselves start and what we really want. We forget that we even want it in the first place. We lose track of what it is we feel. We downplay our pain until something inside of us just finally says, enough. That's where today's episode begins. This whole series, actually. It doesn't begin with blame and not with shame, but with this honest reckoning of what it's really cost us to always be nice. Because true kindness includes self. I mean, it really has to, right? Otherwise, it's not kindness. It's performance. It's erasing oneself. It's being invisible. And it's time that we stopped applauding this slow disappearance of good people under the weight of their own goodness. Let's pause for a second here, though, and get really honest, shall we? When was the last time that you said yes when you really wanted to say no? Not because you were genuinely moved to help, but more so because you were afraid of what saying no would actually mean. That you'd be seen as selfish, or you'd be seen as unkind or difficult. That you might lose the relationship, or you might even lose their respect. See, this gnawing fear is not irrational. It's rooted in something quite real. And many of us, we've been trained to believe that our worth is measured by what we give up. And that goodness is proven through self-denial. Especially if we grew up in these environments where love was tied to performance, or where emotions were invalidated, or dismissed, or even punished. And in these settings, being nice was never just about manners, was it? It was more about survival. But survival mode kindness doesn't really build intimacy. It builds dependency, and it builds expectations, and eventually this quiet resentment. Resentment that no one checks in on us, and that no one asks for what we need, and that no one really notices how tired we are. But the question is, how could they? See, we've made it our job to ensure that they never have to. We smooth every wrinkle, and we fill every gap, and we preempt every disappointment, and we apologize for having needs, for taking up space, for daring to want something more than just gratitude for our self-sacrifice. And because we've trained others to expect this version of us, well, they really question it. If anything, they reward it. You're so easygoing, is what they say, right? You're always there for everyone, and you never cause drama. I appreciate you for that. And I mean, they say it with true admiration, but underneath that admiration is a demand that you should stay this way. Don't change. Don't complicate things. So don't make us confront the truth of how much you've been giving without reciprocity, right? And that's where this fracture begins to grow. Because deep down, there's this part of us that knows that this is not sustainable. I mean, we can feel ourselves thinning, right? It's like we're being stretched across too many roles, too many responsibilities, too many emotional containers, and never actually being asked if we consent to hold these tensions. And then the guilt comes in, because when we try to pull back, even slightly, we're hit with the discomfort of other people's disappointments. And then we feel selfish and ungrateful and mean. And so we keep going. We keep smiling. We keep offering, right? We keep absorbing until the version of us that we show the world is this curated, palatable version of ourselves. One that's designed to maintain harmony, even if that harmony costs us our authenticity. But there's a hidden danger here, though. See, when kindness is built on being self-erased, it trains us to disown our own truths. And we start gaslighting ourselves. I mean, was I really upset? Maybe I'm overreacting, right? Or did that boundary really matter? Or maybe it wasn't a big deal. Should I maybe say something? Or maybe I'm just being too dramatic. And then we convince ourselves that our pain doesn't count, and that our needs are negotiable, that our truth is optional. And in doing so, we become strangers to our own inner voice. See, here's what makes it even trickier. Our culture confuses niceness with virtue, especially in these certain roles like caregivers and women and faith communities, right? And service jobs. We get praised for disappearing, for being endlessly accommodating, for making everyone else feel comfortable, even when it costs us dearly. And then when we finally crack, when we finally get angry and exhausted and depleted, we're seen as the problem. You've changed, they'll say, right? Or what happened to the old you? The thing is, we didn't change though, did we? We just stopped pretending. And that's what this episode is about. Not shaming ourselves for having been nice, but finally seeing the cost of making nice our whole identity. Because kindness is only a virtue when it flows from a place of wholeness, not when it's used to gain approval or avoid rejection. See, real kindness includes honesty. Real kindness makes room for boundaries. Real kindness doesn't require you to disappear. Instead, it invites you to show up fully, messily, in your humanness, and still choose love and truth and mutuality. That's a very different energy from people pleasing. People pleasing says, I'll be whatever you need so that you won't leave me. Whereas integrity says, I'll be who I am and I'll meet you in love. But I'm not going to abandon myself to do that. That's the shift we're talking about here. It's a terrifying shift at first. Because if you've built your identity around being liked, being real can feel like quite a risk. And you may disappoint people. You may lose people. And the thing is, you'll gain something far more powerful, and that is you're going to gain yourself. And from that place where you're rooted and clear and unapologetic, you can begin to build relationships where kindness is mutual, where care flows both ways, and where you don't have to be invisible to be included. You actually get to stop being a ghost in your own life. You get to matter. Not for what you're offering, and not for how agreeable you are, but for who you truly are, fully. That's what we're learning to do and practice in this series. It's the courage to choose virtue that also includes yourself, not virtue that erases you. And the kindness that doesn't require abandoning yourself so that you could be real. There's something almost addictive about being seen as the nice one. It gives this kind of social currency, an identity that feels secure and admired. See, people trust us. They lean on us. They say things like, I don't know what I'd do without you, right? And that feels good. Like, it feels deeply good. Especially if you spent much of your life feeling invisible, inadequate, or unworthy. Being nice gives you this way to belong, right? A reason for people to keep you around. A role that you can play to guarantee proximity, even if it's not intimacy. But here's a quiet tragedy. You see, over time, this role starts to replace your actual self. You become known more for how useful you are, but not how honest you are. And you get stuck in the dynamic where the moment you stop performing your niceness, that's when the connection starts to evaporate. People will stop calling, they'll stop asking, they'll stop including you, because what they wanted wasn't you. It was the benefits of your self-sacrifice. That can be a brutal realization. And many of us would rather stay overcommitted and quietly resentful than face the emptiness of those transactional relationships. And so we keep performing. We keep showing up with a smile when truly we're just exhausted. We keep offering support when our tank is empty. Because the alternative, being rejected for showing up in our full selves, it often feels unbearable. But let's name the hidden loss here, shall we? When we orient our lives around being palatable, we lose access to relationships that could actually meet us in our complexity. We train others not to expect depth from us, and not to expect truths, and not to ask how we really are. And when we try to shift, when we finally speak up and set a boundary saying no without any apology, it often shocks the system, and we're met with confusion and pushback and disappointments or silence. And that's when this voice inside of us says, see, this is why we don't speak up. This is why we stay quiet and palatable and small. But here's the truth we need to hold on to. Other people's discomfort is not proof that we're wrong. It's just evidence that we've changed and they didn't really consent to the rewrite, which is okay. We are allowed to change the contract, especially if the original contract was signed out of fear and not one's choice. This moment when you start reclaiming your truth is not just a personal milestone, it's an act of cultural defiance. Because we live in a world that rewards compliance over authenticity, where niceness is a currency and emotional honesty is often seen as too much. So when we choose to be kind and honest, when we dare to say, that hurt me, or I can't keep doing this, or I need to matter in this relationship as well, it's in these moments that we're pushing against the tide that has swept away so many of us from ourselves. And yes, it's scary, but it's also sacred. And we're coming home to the parts of ourselves that were never meant to be bargained away. And as we do, it's here that we'll start noticing something very beautiful. And that is the relationships that can't hold the real you, they will fall away. And there's a likelihood that that's going to hurt. But it'll also make space for connections that are rooted not in obligation, but space where people don't need you to perform so that you can stay close. Space for a life where kindness isn't a mask anymore, but it's an extension really of your wholeness. And that's the real turning point in this conversation. See, when we stop asking, am I being nice enough? And instead start asking, is this kindness honest? Is it mutual? Is it sustainable? It's this point that we see the change, because clarity comes in. Performance will always leave you lonely. When you're performing kindness, it'll always matter on how many people are praising you. But the shift doesn't mean that you become cold or hard, or that you abandon generosity or compassion. It just means that you're just recentering your humanity. It means that you're letting your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. It means that you're still good, lovable, even when you disappoint others. It means that you're understanding that protecting your energy is not the same as being selfish. And that honesty is not cruelty, and that boundaries are not betrayal. In fact, I would say the most loving thing that you can offer others is your full self, a version that isn't edited for their comfort. And yes, not everyone's going to welcome that, right? They will offer you something that you've longed for your whole life, though, if you're consistent in this, and that is connection without conditions, love without performance, and safety without silence. That's the kind of life that we're making space for here. One where kindness is not a currency, and where goodness is not measured by exhaustion, and where being real is more valued than being nice. It's where intimacy is finally possible because you're finally showing up as your true self. This is the cost of always being kind, and that is you lose yourself. But the reward for reclaiming your voice and your needs and your truth, it's belonging, like true belonging, the kind that doesn't ask you to vanish in order to be loved. So where do we go from here? What does it actually look like to stop performing niceness without swinging into the other extreme of cold detachment or chronic defensiveness? How do we return to our integrity without giving up on intimacy? I think it begins by slowing down. Slowing down long enough to ask the hard questions that we've been too busy or too scared or too overextended to answer. And that is, what do I need in this relationship that I haven't actually said out loud? Or where have I silently been keeping the peace at the expense of my own truth? What am I afraid will happen if I stop being the agreeable one? These questions are terrifying, not because we may not know the answers, but because deep down, we've always known the answers, right? We've just convinced ourselves that it was safer to pretend that we didn't. Because once we name the truth, then we're responsible for it, aren't we? And once we're responsible, we can't unknow it, can we? We can't keep living in this loop of smiling through situations that leave us depleted. We can't keep fawning or apologizing or over accommodating in hopes that someone else will finally notice and then take care of us. See, we have to begin the sacred and messy process of relearning ourselves, which means saying no and letting that stand. Expressing hurt without softening it for others' comfort, or letting silence hang in the air without rushing to fix it with a joke or reassurance. Revealing that we're not okay without dressing it up as a joke or brushing it off 5 seconds later. It also means that when we feel guilt simply for taking up space, we name that. See, we might feel guilt for not replying fast enough. We might feel guilty for being emotionally available to everyone only when we have the capacity for it. Guilty for resting and for slowing down and for not doing more. And then questioning that guilt instead of just accepting that it's not a sign of failure or evidence that we've been abandoning ourselves. Because here's the truth. Guilt is not always a good moral compass. Sometimes it's just a shadow that is left behind by these old survival strategies we've relied on. And healing means we begin to stop obeying that shadow. We don't become less kind to grow. We just need to become more integrated, where kindness is no longer the enemy of our truth, but actually it can be seen as a partner to that truth, right? Where compassion also includes ourselves and not just others, where our softness is grounded with boundaries, and where our warmth is no longer a performance, but a choice. This is the journey, I think, that we can take towards relational integrity. And it's rarely linear. I mean, you'll have moments when you relapse into these old patterns, where you agree too quickly, where you apologize for things that really aren't your fault, where you feel that old panic when someone pulls away after you've spoken your truth. That's okay. You're not failing. You're practicing, and you're rebuilding a life that no longer depends on being liked in order for you to feel worthy. And you're building something stronger, a sense of self that doesn't really evaporate when someone else is disappointed in you. But let's be real, shall we? It's true, some people will fall away. Those who depended on your silence or your service or your suppression will find your honesty quite inconvenient. But then there are others who will draw closer because finally they can actually feel you in the room, not just your accommodations. They can trust your yes because it's no longer automatic. And they can receive your care as a gift, not a debt. And you can exhale, you can rest, you can begin to trust that love doesn't have to be earned through erasing yourself. And that presence doesn't really require you to pretend anymore. And that being deeply good doesn't require you to be endlessly nice. So let's call this what it is. This is like more of a homecoming to the self that you were before the world convinced you that disappearing was noble, right? To the voice inside that says, this isn't fair, or I wish someone would ask how I'm doing. And I matter as well, to that voice. To the life that you were always meant to live. One where your kindness flows from your wholeness and not from fear anymore. I want to end this episode with just a reminder, not a resolution, but more a reminder. You don't need to become less to be more powerful, right? You need to become more honest, more rooted, more willing to disappoint people who only love you when you're convenient. And that is how we transform from performing in the kind zone to participating in intimacy. It's where we stop offering connection in exchange for safety. And where we start building lives where love and truth don't have to be opposites anymore. Because when kindness and clarity meet, when intimacy and integrity embrace, we finally experience this kind of connection that we've been starving for all along. That's a connection that is real and reciprocal, and a connection that's rooted in the fullness of who we are. Let me know how your reflections were sparked through this episode. I'd love to hear any insights that I may have missed. Drop them down in the comments. Thanks for listening.